All right, tell me when we're good. Okay, hey, Eric Byler here at the TEACH conference in Washington, D.C. I'm with Randi Weingartner. Did I say it right? Sorry. Okay, Weingarten. Yes? Okay.
Perfect.
She's the president of the American Federation of Teachers, which, by the way, also represents hundreds of thousands of nurses. So education and healthcare are big issues in American politics today. I saw your speech yesterday. It sounded like you were making a moral indictment of the Betsy DeVos, Donald Trump agenda to bring charter schools into the inner cities of America. Could you summarize that case?
Well, we were making a moral indictment of, just like climate change deniers, Betsy DeVos is a public school denier. So we were asking our membership to both resist injustice and reclaim the promise of public education. We were calling out and critiquing what is a failed agenda in terms of private school choice, but at the same time forging the pathway to actually making every public school a place that parents want to send their kids and educators want to work and kids are engaged, because we know more than anything we have to meet the needs and aspirations of parents, 90% of whom send their kids to public schools. But the bottom line is this. At the same exact time as 1,400 educators from around the country, sometimes at their own, taking money out of their own pocket, are here in Washington, D.C., trying to make sure that they hone in their craft, that they can be the best they can be. At the same time as we are here doing that, Betsy DeVos is in Denver at a corporate lobbyist convention of people who want to destroy public schools, defund public schools. And so how dare she come at us and say that we are the problem when it is the corporate defunders and privatization folks who want to basically make money off of public schools and off of parents who are really hurting our kids.
Can you explain the way that public schools are funded and whether that varies from county to county to municipality to municipality, but also how that profit motive comes into play?
So, look, public schools are the foundation of democracy. They are locally based, and we have fought for them to be locally based throughout the country. Some of them are funded through state funds. About 50% of school funding is through state funds. About 40% of full school funding is through local property taxes, and about 10% of it is through the federal government. So most of schooling is funded through state and local either income tax or property tax. But the problem is this: when half your kids in our public schools are poor, we need to give kids who need the most. But what normally happens is a rich suburb like Scarsdale can fund their schools at a higher level than a place like Detroit. And so what we fight for is equity in funding. And what we fight for is ensuring that there are programs for poor kids that meet their needs, that may be where you require more than a community can fund. That's why you have the federal funding like Title I. What Betsy DeVos wants to do is she wants to take that funding away from poor kids throughout the country and give it to private school vouchers that are allowed to discriminate against other kids. So what she wants to do is take things that have worked, like summer school programs and after-school programs and lowering class size, wipe them all out, divert that funding to vouchers that have not in the last 25 years worked to benefit the kids they were purportedly there to benefit. In fact, kids that have gone to voucher schools have actually done worse than kids in public schools in D.C., in Louisiana, and in Ohio. But what she does is she says all of this is in the name of choice. And yes, of course, we want parents to have programs that work for their kids. But what parents really want, and we've seen this in poll after poll, is they want a neighborhood public school that works for their kids. And they want a neighborhood public school that has art and that has music and that has science, and that if their kid is struggling, can help their kid, and has challenging classes for their kids to soar. A school that is safe and valuable. And what we've seen is in the things that she is promoting and supporting, private school vouchers, tuition tax credits, online charters, for-profit charters. What we've seen is that, number one, they discriminate, and they're allowed to discriminate. Number two, they have increased racial segregation and economic segregation. And number three, they have not helped kids. So why are you promoting things that don't help kids and at the same time cutting funding and destabilizing schools that have the promise to help kids?
Well, that's why I think the profit motive is something we need to examine. So what happens to this money after they harvest the $8,000 per pupil that might come from the students that they bring out of the public schools? And I know that that money does not go to that school, but what happens to the $8,000? Is it then spent on the education of the child?
Well, it doesn't. So take the DC voucher program. We don't know how that money is spent. There's no transparency for it. There's no accountability for it. What we know is that in places like Ohio with for-profit charters, we know that they have been windfalls for profiteers. We know the same thing has happened in terms of Florida. So K-12 Inc., we know that they are an online for-profit charter organization, and that they don't actually spend on children the amount of money that they get for children. And so we know that some of that money goes for profits. But we also know that their bottom line has gone down hugely because they've done such a bad job. So the profit motive should never be involved, in my judgment, in education. Education is foundational to democracy. And if there is extra funding for kids, it should go to things kids need, like lower class sizes, like art, like music. Like, how do we recruit and retain teachers for, to be the best teachers we can get and we can keep when people have so many options to become lawyers and doctors and other professions. But the difference here is we believe in having public schools, that public education is a public good that is foundational to democracy, and that every bit of tax dollars that go to that should be accountable, should be transparent, but should go for kids' education. They believe that if you privatize and commoditize education, that the profit motive is more important than anything else, and then the market will make a decision about who gets educated and who doesn't.
Right, and the profit motive will make sure some people get rich, whether or not the schools thrive or whether they fail.
Because it is part of what this whole choice movement is part of. It is this particular private school choice movement. Look, its history is rooted in segregation. But what the current movement is part of is the decades-long campaign to shift economic and political power to the rich. What we're talking about is how you help all kids. And you can't help all kids unless you have a system that is about all kids. Because every child doesn't have a parent or an advocate that is going to be as relentless and as effective as maybe a billionaire parent. Parents have lots to do. They care about their kids a lot, but it doesn't mean that they're always going to be able to be incredibly effective at getting everything they need for their kids. That is why a system has to be accountable and transparent and equitable for all kids. So if a kid is hungry, we need to feed a kid. If a kid is falling behind in math or English, they need to have a summer school opportunity. All of that costs money, and you can't expect a parent to be doing 3 or 4 jobs and then at the same time saying, I need to go to the school superintendent and get summer school for my kid. That's all of our jobs to make sure that happens. What Betsy DeVos is doing is she's basically saying the private schools get to pick the kids that they want for those schools, and they will get the money, and they don't have to be transparent, and they can discriminate, and they don't have to be accountable, and just let the market decide. That has never worked in education, and it will work. With the places that have done it, like Sweden or Chile, have seen their scores go down. And places like Michigan, where she had basically defunded public schools in Detroit and other places and really pushed for for-profit charters, we saw in Michigan the school rankings go down in English and in math from about 25 in 2003 to about 41, 42 in 2015. So what she has proposed has not worked to help kids, but what it has done has been very harmful in destabilizing the public schools that are available for all kids.
You step that way one step? Okay, cool. So I want to talk about what you said about the, just really quickly, about the segregation route of the school choice movement. So states like North Carolina changed their constitution after Brown v. Board to allow public dollars to go to private, all-white academies to perpetuate segregation. So we know that. And I think we also know that after segregation finally did begin to take hold, there was such resentment that the public schools where people of color sent their children were sabotaged in terms of the funding that they received. So as a parent who has a basic grasp of that history, they know that the schools where the children of color are going are being sabotaged, and the schools where the white kids are going are being well-funded for various reasons that have to do with property taxes and all of that, like you mentioned. Well, what's your argument to the parent who says, well, knowing that, I'm going to try to send my child to a school where most of the students are white and they're going to have a better opportunity to get a leg up in this world?
First off, I don't think it falls as neatly as you just said. Schooling is messy, and there are white communities that are poor, there are African American communities that are more middle class. The bottom line is we need to have better funding for all schools. We need to have more integration. We need to fight segregation racially or economically. But we also, I agree with a parent who says to me, I want a school that works for my kids, and I want a more integrated school. I think we need to have a real focus on how do we integrate more? How do we create more inclusion? How do we create more diversity? I completely agree that we have to have a bigger choice system within public schools, and that's why we think that there should be more AP courses. We think there should be more magnet schools. We think there should be more career tech ed schools. But at the very bottom line, every neighborhood school should be a place where parents can send their kids and want to send their kids, where educators want to work, where kids are engaged. And that is our obligation, not only as school teachers, but as trade unionists. And frankly, it is the oath of office that a Secretary of Education takes to help all kids, not just to promote privatization and profitization, particularly in schools that have not worked, and to actually favor the profiteers over the kids in America. That makes no sense if you are the Secretary of Education. If you want to be a rich corporatist, a gazillionaire who's advocating privately, look, this is America.
Why not both?
People can say whatever they want to say. But if you are the Secretary of Education, you owe a responsibility to every single child in America, and that means you have an obligation not to cut budgets for school kids, but to find ways to ensure that every public school works for kids.
Right now our country is being ruled by a minority coalition that includes oligarchs like Betsy DeVos and white Americans who are concerned about demographic shift. They're concerned about their children not being able to enjoy the same privileges and advantages that they might have. And so what would be your argument to those people, the same people I just mentioned before, that to say you may be able to achieve some advantage for your child, but there's a cost to that if we sabotage our public schools?
Well, I spend a lot of time in Red America, in Blue America. I spend a lot of time with people regardless of the where they live, what their demographic status is, what their political persuasion is. And frankly, what I am seeing is that these kind of divisions that our politicians do is in furtherance of rigging an economic and political system. But if you actually talk to Americans across the country, what they want are good jobs with a voice at work and a secure retirement. They want to make sure they're not one illness away from bankruptcy. They want good public schools that prepare their kids for life and for citizenship, for career and college. And what I've made the argument is that to do those three things, you need to have a vibrant democracy that protects the right to vote, not suppresses it. And we need to fight against bigotry and hate, because bigotry and hate against one group of people one day will mean bigotry and hate against another group another day. And so when you talk to people, white, black, Hispanic, Native, or somebody whose ancestors came from the Mayflower, people really believe in a common set of values. But what has happened is people like Trump, people like DeVos try to emphasize the fear and try to emphasize the us versus them, as opposed to what America should be, which is that we all get ahead, where we all work together and we lift all boats.
In tough economic times, you can understand why people say, you know what, maybe this country isn't going to do so well as a whole, but I want to make sure that my family gets ahead, right?
The only way that any individual family is going to get ahead is if we actually have as a common set of aspirations an economy that works for all and an education system that works for all. So when we fight to make sure that there's lower class sizes, that is a fight for all, but particularly for those who have the least. When we fight for summer school and for after school, because if kids graduate and they graduate on time, then what happens is that they're going to go and be productive citizens. So the fight for kids, the fight for black and brown kids in America is a fight for America. And what we believe is that you do this through lifting all boats. You do this by having a ladder of opportunity. The same arguments, for anybody who's listening to this, the same arguments were made against Italians and Jews from Eastern Europe who came into this country in the early 1900s. The same arguments that you hear against brown and black America. We need to stop those arguments, and we need to be, as a whole, fighting to have the greatest economic engine we can and the greatest educational system we can. And that means helping all Americans, meeting them where their needs are through public education, all kids, all Americans, all the time.
Can I do one healthcare question? Can I? One healthcare? Okay. So on Monday, there's going to be a huge rally for Medicare for All at the U.S. Capitol. There's rallies all over the United States. And the same profit motive lesson that we are learning in education with the failure of Betsy DeVos's model in Michigan, and especially in Detroit, that has also played out in the healthcare system. So, for instance, in the rural areas, Trump country, they also look at harvesting public dollars for private gain. It's very similar to the per pupil public dollars. It's the per well-insured Medicare patient public dollars. It's worth $10,000 a year to those rural hospitals if the people are well insured. But if they're not well insured, those rural hospitals are saying, well, geez, my profit margin is going to go down. I may as well just close this hospital and focus more on areas where the people are better insured.
And I think the situation is far more complicated. There are a lot, with all due respect, there are a lot of communities in America who fund their public schools with public dollars who don't do it in a way to hurt others. And I think that this is, look, I personally believe in single payer and Medicare for all. But what we have to do right now is make sure that Obamacare does not collapse, is not sabotaged by Donald Trump and by the Republicans who want to use the money for a tax cut. We need to make sure that people have the insurance they need. I would like it to be, Medicare for all. But right now, we have to fight to stop them from repealing Obamacare and from taking away Medicaid as we know it.
Thank you very much for your time. Okay.